Right.
I mean,
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Right. Well, who would have thought this is our last Q&A for 2025, and we will now resume in a few weeks' time on the 12th of January. Nevertheless, we're going to try to have a good time. This whole thing will be recorded, and now we are editing stuff and publishing it as podcasts as well, so you can get access to it later if you want to. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Startup Talent Q&A. It's our 177th session. We've been doing these now for about 4.5 years, or just over, where 290,000 people have joined us as we've answered about 3,000 questions from founders. And obviously, none of that would have been possible without people like Margaret, Lou, Carl, and today Joe. So if the panelists would like to drop their LinkedIn URLs in the chat, please feel free to do so in case anybody wants to reach out to you. Or the least we can do, I guess, it's follow you on LinkedIn for all the good stuff that you're doing. Now, in terms of today's questions, they can be on anything to do with your talent journey, whether you want to know how and where to find the right people, how to interview them, how to decide what skills and experience they should have, or perhaps you may want to know how to build your company culture or your branding and all that jazz. There literally are no wrong questions, and there's no need to be shy because it's a learning curve for us all. If your questions are on other matters and not talent, please save them for the other conversations we run. In general, we run 6 regular conversations: Monday's talent, Tuesday's product and tech, Wednesday's growth, Thursday's fundraising, second Friday of each month it's UK startup law, and third Friday of each month it's UK startup finances. They're all from 12 to 1 p.m. UK time. They're all available on our site, startuptoscaleup.club. Again, the site, it's startuptoscaleup.club. And actually, when you're on our site, what you may also want to do is join our WhatsApp community. We've got some amazing groups of founders, investors, operators, and of course, our second to none panelists / mentors that you can connect with. Today, we're going to do this quite simply, as we always do. We're going to have some quick introductions. Then I'll be asking our panelists for their do's and don'ts when it comes to early stage hiring. And then we'll open it for questions from the audience. So without further ado, my name's Anton Cole. I'm an Albanian in London working with startups normally right after they get investment. I embed within their teams and help them hire and keep the right people. I also do some growth advisory work with a few other startups and some accelerators. And I help some angels and family offices with their due diligence and assessment.
Anton. Hi, everybody. My name is Lou Matthews, and I'm the founder of The Culture Craft. We are a people and culture agency who design and deliver culture as an operating system or the infrastructure to high performance and growth. We do that through fixed scope, fixed price, transparent sprints, agile methodology. And we work with scaling startups normally around Series A to B.
Hi everyone, I'm Margaret. I have been working in the talent space, primarily in recruitment for 2 decades. During that time, I've recruited for tech companies of different sizes, from startups to large tech organizations, hiring very internationally and across all different functions. So product, engineering, sales, marketing, finance, just absolutely everything. Apart from that, I do a lot of interview training and coaching, and I'll be happy to answer any questions related to hiring, interviewing and training.
Hi everybody, I'm Jo Barnett. I am a HR leader with about, again, 2 decades of experience. My background spans learning and development, culture, diversity, inclusion, and internal comms. Most of my background in the last 10 years has been in scale-ups where you're trying to build a lot with very little money and very little people, and how that impacts culture, conflict, inter-team communication, and how that impacts the choices that you make, the decisions that you make on where you go next, whether that's to build or hire. Yeah, I think hopefully I can contribute to the conversation.
Hi, I'm Carl. Nice to meet you. My background originally was in finance and private equity investing, but my interest has always been on the people side, and I finally moved over about 8 years ago to do that. I spent about 6.5 years running the people side of a deep tech scale up through to exit. But my main activity is that I have an academy where we train people in the area we call executive self-management, which is what enables people to continue to function under greater pressure and of different sources. And I also still do some fractional chief people officer work. That's it.
Wow, that is amazing. We've got a brilliant team today, everybody. Brace yourselves. Fortunately, over 90% of startups fail. And the top 3 reasons for that are 1, market fit, 2, running out of money, and 3, not having the right people. But when you think about it, it all comes down to you getting the right people, because with the right people, you'll be able to sort things out. And if you don't have the right people, then you don't stand a chance. And it's as simple as that. If we can have one do and one don't from yourselves when it comes to early stage people.
Okay, so my one do would be to hire for potential and problem solving ability and not just experience. So in my experience in early stage startups, roles evolve faster than job descriptions. So you need people who can learn quickly, adapt, and who can actually figure things out with limited direction. So what it means in practice is that you look for transferable skills rather than one-to-one role matches. So for example, a marketer who scaled a B2C subscription product might bring powerful acquisition instinct, even if your product is B2B SaaS, and also like assess ownership, how do they talk about past work? Do they say we or I, do they show initiative when things are not clear? You can even ask scenario-based questions like, if you joined next week, how would you approach growing signups with no paid budgets, just to see kind of how they think. So, considering startups change direction often, you want someone who's curious and who's adaptable, not someone who can only operate within a fixed process. And just quick don't. So just don't hire reactively, just to relieve pressure. So it's very tempting to bring someone like kind of anyone, when you stretch thin, that can like a reactive hire that can almost cost more time and morale later. Just before opening a role, ask yourself, like, what problem will this person solve? How will we know we succeeded in 6 months? And if you're unsure, just hire a contractor or advisor short term to validate that need.
Thanks, Margaret. I would say treat culture as infrastructure, right? That's a thing that dictates how people get work done. So it's not a nice to have, very much an operating system. And that's from how you hire, onboard, how people make decisions, who makes those decisions, how you handle performance, and also who's responsible where. So everything doesn't end up sitting with you, and write it down. In my experience, you're going to either design those things now and invest in it now, even if it seems early, or they have a tendency to design themselves, and that has a tendency to not always go so well. On the don't, I would say don't wait until something breaks. So probably on the flip side of that, whether that is a mishire, a very messy, complex, high-risk exit, case of burnout, or even potential discrimination, those things tend to happen unintentionally, but it's the impact that matters. So don't wait for that to happen, because without people and culture built intentionally, they're guaranteed to happen. And fixing it later, as somebody who also deals in those highly complex and risky investigations, I can tell you it's quite expensive when they do happen. So putting in that simple structure early is a great way to navigate that and mitigate those risks from happening.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. On the do side, I would think about the amount of time that you're planning on spending in an interview process, getting to know the person and trying to understand their kind of motivations and their interest for it. I'd take that amount and basically just triple it as a rule of thumb. And I think you'll find that additional time trying to really get to know someone and trying to really provide transparency on your side, at a very early stage, is an extremely high kind of return on investment time. I think on the don't side, especially like in the back of a capital raising, everyone wants to go and hire employees. And I think, as was stated before, I think there's a lot of time where you could do really well with contractors. And that provides, a lot greater sort of flexibility on both sides. And I think some of the best hires end up being contractors that do well and then move to perm. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah, for me, the do's are definitely measure the unmeasurable. There are a number of metrics within people teams that are difficult to grasp. But quite often when you're in startup scale-up space, you recognize that the business is operating under extreme stress and pressure. and it is about storytelling in that space. So it's not just around, your simple metrics like eNPS twice a year. It is about a people partner dashboard that might talk about the commercial cost, how many ER interventions there were, how early they were fixed, where are the preventatives, where we start to kind of move into a more expensive space. But good dashboards that outline people risk on a quarterly basis and how you're shifting the needle, I think are ways of identifying gaps in the business that impact your financials and your commercial output, but tell a different story. So if you have an idea that your business is operating under stress because the typical problems around not having enough people or not having enough process or enough money, you need to be able to back that up with data and with evidence. And in terms of don'ts, don't have a disconnect and a lack of cohesion within the people team. I think to prove your strategic capability and worth to the business that's moving at pace and often with a lot of velocity, don't have those disconnects, for example, within hiring, where you might be hiring people above pay scales or quicker than you've planned for in terms of that headcount planning, and have a disconnect between their onboarding or the infrastructure that you have once they hit their teams, or hiring manager capability. I think it's really important that there is a cohesion within a people function so that the employee experience is one that retains people once you have them on board.
Amazing stuff. Thank you very much to all of you. I think it's now time to go on to some questions. But before that, a quick reset of the conversation for those of you that have just joined us, especially those on the live stream. So this is Startup Talent Q&A. It's our 177th session. We're here with 4 amazing people who've been there and done it in terms of early stage people journey. And the idea is quite simple. We're here to help you with whatever questions you may have in how to find, how to keep or empower the right people for your startup business. There are no wrong questions, and there's no need to be shy. It's a learning curve for us all. All you have to do is drop your question in the chat. We'll give you the mic, you introduce yourself, and then fire away with whatever question you have for us. For those of you on the live streams, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter/X, please be aware that unfortunately we are unable to monitor your questions there live. If you want to ask questions, that is, you'll have to do it here on Microsoft Teams. It's audio only, which means you can tune in from anywhere via any platform or device. It doesn't really matter whether you're walking in a park somewhere, or perhaps walking your dog, or maybe cooking lunch in, let's say, Liverpool, having lunch in Glasgow, working from a shared office in Shoreditch, or, I don't know, changing baby nappies in Bristol. It's quite easy for you to tune in. Best thing to do is to go to our website, startuptoscaleup.club. So again, it's startuptoscaleup.club. You scroll down a little bit, you'll find today's session, which is Startup Talent Q&A 177. Click join. It's a quick registration on Luma. There you'll find today's link, and through that link, then you can tune in here. Once you're here, drop your question in the chat, and then we'll give you the mic. Introduce yourself and fire away with your question. Now, we'll go on to the first question of today that was sent in to us. This is from a co-founder of a seed-stage food tech startup in Glasgow. I'm concerned about leadership continuity as we scale. How can we implement a structured succession planning process for the critical roles within the team, ensuring that we're prepared for both planned and unplanned transitions in leadership positions? Now, let's see what it's a bit tricky when you're not here for us to really drill down as to what you're mostly worried about and kind of get some background info. But nevertheless, let's see what the team's got to say in terms of succession planning. If we can keep it to a minute each, by the way, please, panelists. So perhaps we can start with Carl, then we go on to Lou, then Joe, and last but not least, Margaret. Take it away.
Sure. I think at seed stage, quite small as a company, I would have thought kind of from the outset that in terms of succession options for critical roles, maybe just be structurally limited in the number of sort of different people out there that you have to choose from. I think the thing on any of the structure things is, if you really do care about structure, notwithstanding the chaos of being seed stage form to put in, sort of a quarterly times, a set time to go into to actually look at it and to see where you are. I think the simplest things on things starts with jotting down at each of those times what the actual scope of work and responsibilities are for those leadership positions. As Margaret said, things move very, very fast. So it's never kind of what the historical job description is. But I think if you could start with clarity about what the functional need is at that time, and then from that just move to sort of what they call, like in American sports, it's kind of like next person up, which is assuming that each of the top people aren't there. Well, then how are those roles very specifically met? I think you can do that, and it can seem like a all-encompassing, overwhelming type task. I do think things like this you can also just do, at least in an iterative basis, in a kind of accelerated form, like with like a sort of 20-minute sprint on some of these to get the key ideas down. And then again, as I think the key thing is having fixed times where you're going to come back and at least touch back in on it.
Thank you. I would add, mapping those critical roles and making sure they are truly critical. So not every role, but just asking some really simple questions around revenue, product, or relationships. What decisions do they make? What relationships do they hold? What knowledge lives only in their head? I actually had a call last week from a client where there is a planned move and exit, but there's a dependency. And I think particularly in tech startups, I've seen this a number of times where there is a dependency on the head of engineering or tech or CTO because the knowledge lives in their head and there is no business without that person's. Really looking at it from the perspective of dependencies. Do you have a dependency on anybody in the business? That's not to say there will be roles that you maybe don't know the ins and outs of exactly what they do, but actually the information lives elsewhere, even outside of the company, that somebody else could pick up. So that's not necessarily a critical role. One of the things I think with succession planning I've seen as well is there's a tendency to do it behind the curtains because we worry that if people hear that we're doing it, they might get concerned about their roles. But actually making a bit of an if I'm not here plan part of everybody's job description or objectives. It's okay to say to people, you need to make sure there's no dependency on an individual in the business. That's a risk to the business. It's perfectly okay for a founder to not want there to be that level of risk. So that also takes the dependency away from you from having to do all of this work. So making sure that people have things documented, just a minimum that's needed, a bit of a playbook around all your roles and what needs to be known so that somebody else can pick it up. And then finally, just to elevate on the documentation, you can build this into your culture now through exposure, right? So you don't need to wait until you know exactly what's going to happen. Treat everything like it's going to be unplanned because it might happen tomorrow, right? And actually pairing people up, whether there's somebody else that could be the number two that sits in on key meetings with these key roles, and rotating ownership as well. So just keeping a close eye on, is there somebody who's doing a bit of everything, kind of holding on to things? And I think you'll find as well as you grow, what tends to happen in startups, or what I've seen, is that there's a bit of an emotional attachment to building things, to things that people have built, and rightly so. They've been there from the very early days and they've helped the business get to where it is. And then suddenly when you want everybody to be able to do that, document it, so you don't have those risks, there can be that emotional attachment that feels really vulnerable for people. So making sure that actually they have a bit of a number two, there's the expectation that they reduce any dependency in themselves, and getting other people to do some of the parts of their roles, like owning stand-ups or customer meetings or investor updates, that type of thing.
I couldn't agree more with Louise's comments. I would say that there's things that you can do. There's a big shift at the moment to start looking at skills rather than job roles in their entirety, and start to map out your proficiency against each of those skills in the business. So there'd be nothing to stop you really doing that at a senior leadership level, trying to figure out like what are the actual critical fires that we would need to manage and stop getting out of control in the absence of a person, and who has the skills to cover that, even if on a temporary basis. And you might find that succession is maybe 2 or 3 people in the short term, while you try and figure out, is that role critical in the future? Can we start to merge some of our other C-suite roles? Like, is there a way we can be smarter? But I would say at least look at the things that would be urgent if that gap was to be unplanned. In terms of being more proactive, in the business I'm in at the moment, we're just in the process of setting up regular talent reviews, where I do err against using a traditional 9-box grid. I don't necessarily think it comes out with the best outcomes, but start to look at whether someone's performing and they're doing the right thing in the right place, and actually are they actively growing, or are they seeking out growth experiences? If you can map people on a simple 4-box grid like that with those 2 axes, you can actually start to look at where is your talent across the business that's ready for the next step. That might be project exposure or a mindset shift, or maybe they are ready to be promoted within their function, or they can move laterally across a business. The more mobility that you can encourage means that you probably have more capability in the event of somebody wanting to move on. So I think those 2 things might prevent some risk.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to what everyone else already said. I mean, in terms of I think at this stage, at the seed stage, succession planning doesn't have to be heavy or formal, but you just want to be intentional. So as others already said, it's identifying which roles are truly critical to the business. So it's usually founders, technical leads, product, basically any role directly tied to revenue or operations. So for each of these roles, document the core responsibilities, key decisions they own, what actually good looks like in that role. So that creates a baseline. So the business isn't overly dependent on one individual. And the second step is really building simple internal backup steps. So that can mean cross-training team members, documenting key processes, also identifying who would potentially step in on an interim basis if someone leaves or is unavailable. If it's a planned transition, you can layer in longer handovers and mentoring. And for the unplanned ones, having clear documentation, decision rights, and temporary ownership already defined makes a huge difference. So I think at this stage, succession planning is just really about reducing risk, not predicting the future. And I think investors tend to see this as a sign of strong, mature leadership as well.
Question 2. This is from a founder of another seed stage clean energy startup in Edinburgh, focused on providing solar solutions for rural communities. We're hiring a part-time marketing manager to help scale our digital presence and engage with potential customers. What steps can we take to create an effective and welcoming onboarding experience for a part-time role, ensuring they understand both our brand, mission, and the technical aspects of our energy solutions? Additionally, how can we maintain ongoing engagement and productivity with them whilst keeping the onboarding process flexible?
And yeah, thank you for starting with me, because I actually do need to leave by in several minutes. So in terms of these questions, I think for a part-time marketing manager role, the most important thing will be to be very intentional with onboarding, because obviously they just won't absorb things by osmosis. So before they start, put together a simple onboarding pack. So it could be a short written overview of your mission and customers, a 1-page brand guide, examples of past campaigns or content, and plain English explanation of your solar solutions and how they're different. And then in week 1, I would actually prioritize context over tasks, a founder intro to the vision, a walkthrough of the product and customer journey, and clarity on what good looks like in the first 30 to 60 days. And also to keep engagement and productivity high in that part-time setup, focus on clear priorities rather than consistent check-ins. So agree on, 2 to 3 core outcomes that they own, have a regular but lightweight catch-up. So for example, a weekly 30-minute call, and use shared tools like Notion or Google Docs or Trello so that progress is visible. So I think flexibility works best when expectations are explicit. So if they know what success looks like and how they work supports your mission. So part-time doesn't necessarily mean lower impact.
For me, I'm just going to focus in on the part-time piece, and just, I think, how quickly decisions can be made and changed in a business of your size, which can be, in half a day or even an hour. So I think it's just around agreeing with that individual how they're going to be catch up on the things they've missed, right? And whether that is an ongoing Asana board or Trello, whatever you want to use is like your productivity. But how can they just quickly read and download what's happened since the last time they were in, based on whether that be over a weekend or it's a couple of days, just so that they don't feel like they're constantly trying to spend the first part of their day catching up, because they're always going to feel like they're in a lag mode rather than a lead mode.
I think those are great points. I think there's definitely something to be said, as the colleagues have mentioned, about investing time up front. I've seen really good onboarding done by taking a person and having them step through each sort of functional stage of the company. So if it starts with the design stage, to have them take like an actual, could be like a transaction or a product that like just finished, but just go through it step by step with the people. So in other words, like instead of being told by engineering or told by technical management or told by commercial, this is what we do, like just to follow it through as if it was a product, and single like car being assembled sort of through a factory kind of a concept. And those kind of like really functional onboarding sometimes can be helpful. Definitely share the concern about someone being part-time. I think that's a tough ask. So investing in making sure they have, especially for a marketing person, like an actual real feel for what the company does, I think is really essential up front.
Thanks, guys. I'm not sure if there's a huge amount else to add to that. I was thinking of it more from the marketing perspective. I think the importance of building deep business context is paramount in any role in a startup, but in a marketing role, even more so. I would say ring fence time from the outset. Tell your team nobody is to go near them for X amount of time, that they need to spend time with everyone, with product, operations, sales, whoever is in the team, that they understand the end to end of the business, the model, also exposure to customers, any of the communities that you serve, and a bit of a simple view of the market, I would say, that you operate in as well. And I always think of these things in terms of how do you make this tangible? How do you know if this is all done and done effectively? So creating a deliverable around that, something as simple as on X date, we're going to ask you to present back on what you've learned about the business, the roles within it, how we operate, one for customers, one for market. That really embeds the learning for them, but it also makes sure that you've got a benchmark and a way to measure the work that they're actually doing in that time. And objectives in those early days, we always talk about in terms of the employee and making the goals very clear. That's absolutely critical. But also objectives for their manager. So whoever that is, where I've said things like ring fencing their time, holding a manager accountable to doing that. And the other area that you asked about was creating engagement, but also flexibility in the process. I think that's fine, but an expectation that a new starter is going to reach out for a meeting or a one-to-one, I don't think is too reasonable in those early days. I think you've got to hold a manager to account to having regular meetings in the diary. I think a short daily stand-up in the first couple of weeks is the most helpful, and then working out the right cadence after that, but actually building those into objectives for the manager so that you're sending the message that they own that onboarding experience and that the onboarding success of the new starter is their success as well. So I think objectives for them, for the manager as well. And in terms of those meetings and, allowing flexibility, I would say just get them in the diary now, repeated meetings. If you need to reschedule, you'll need to reschedule. But a golden rule that I have in my business is that we do cancel meetings. And I hold myself to account by having everything scheduled in my diary as standard.
Lord, this is fire. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm the founder of a pre-seed edtech startup in Glasgow. Wow. We're being bombarded by Scotland today. Brilliant. I'm the founder of a pre-seed edtech startup in Glasgow, creating interactive language learning tools specifically designed for older adults. As we work to build a team that shares our commitment to inclusivity and lifelong learning, I'm struggling to establish a cohesive company culture, especially with limited resources. What are some cost-effective methods to define and instill our core values from the outset? And how can we maintain these cultural elements as we grow, ensuring they resonate with both current and future hires?
Yeah, so I think at the pre-seed stage, culture, that's not posters or perks, it's actually what you consistently do and reward. So one of the simplest ways to define your values is to actually write them as behaviors, not just words. So for example, instead of just saying inclusivity, you define it as, we designed features with accessibility testing for older adults before launch, right? Or we explain decisions in plain language, not jargon, right? So that's just that inclusivity. So you can capture this in one page how we work document and then, share it with every new hire from day one. So, and also and obviously you do the same with all the other values, but then to instill those values without budget, you need to build them into those everyday moments. So for example, open team meetings with a short user story from an older learner to reinforce why the work matters, or like when someone does that's actually aligned with your values, call it out explicitly, and say that's a great example of inclusive thinking, or that reflects our belief in lifelong learning, and over time people actually copy what gets recognized. You can do it on Slack. If you use Slack, you can also do it on Slack. And also we actually do it at Mixmax in terms of recognizing values. And finally, as you grow, protect culture by hiring and onboarding deliberately. So ask interview questions that are tied to your values. For example, tell me about the time you adapted something for a less confident user, or how do you keep learning new skills later in your career? And then during onboarding, pair new hires with like a culture buddy and share real examples of how values show up in decisions, not just a list of words. So that just keeps the culture practical, human, and consistent as the team scales.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Have a good Christmas and New Year's, and
Thank
see
you
you
so
in January,
much. You
hopefully.
too. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Lou?
Thanks, Anton. I'm completely with Margaret in terms of behaviors. I'm somebody who's quite a visual person, and I need to know the specifics of what does that mean. The theory is all very good, and I think the values are your theory, but actually what are the literal words that people can say in any given situation that actually indicate that inclusivity and reflect your values? So it's your values in action. What do they actually look like, sound like? What will it feel like when I'm living by them, when I'm experiencing them? And really mapping that out. Now, I say that and I realize I'm not talking in very specifics, but somewhere that I would start is, if you haven't read it, Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead. I actually just delivered a workshop on Friday on inclusive leadership, and we started with the basics of DEI and making sure everybody shared the same terminology and understanding. And then it was elevated into inclusive leadership and what that actually looks like. Dare to Lead is not inclusivity specific, but actually just all of the concepts and frameworks and methodology within it are inclusive in their nature. So that's a brilliant book, and it's kind of one of those you can't put down either. So I would recommend you have a read of that and pull out. There's loads of stuff online that you can implement straight away. The core concept is around courage and bravery, but actually there's a thread about vulnerability in there. And I think when it comes to inclusivity, we all have to be vulnerable and feel quite exposed to feel comfortable to ask questions, to seek to understand. And it gets quite specific and literal with how to do that, how to say things. So I would recommend your whole team read that as a starting point, and there'll definitely be bits of that you can pull out for your behaviors in that light. I think when it comes to learning in a startup environment, it's really tricky, right? Because it's expensive. And I hear that coming through in the cost-effective methods. One of the things that I help my clients do is just set up a really basic request, right? You don't have to have an L&D program. It does not have to look exactly like what you build and offer your clients, but you can still enable that learning to happen that also benefits your business. So building out, whether it's a form, a Google form, or something that lives in your HR system, but a way for people to say, hey, I want to upskill, and you want them to upskill because that's in line with your values, but they also have to link it to their development plan, link it to a business case. So you get that benefit as well, and backing that up with a policy around repayments if people leave within certain periods of time as well. And you don't even have to have a specific budget in mind overall or per person, but it allows you to start to take requests from people. It gives people the opportunity to learn and develop more formally. And it doesn't have to be a full training program. That could be like they want to buy books for a course they're doing themselves anyway. There's so many different ways that you can allow people access to training as well. And I think that's really in line with your values.
For me, I would say at that early stage where you're forming your values and you're showing everyone in the business what you want them to live and breathe, I would also remember to just keep it fun, make it like really achievable, and that everybody is accountable for holding those values in like daily behaviors. In a previous startup that I worked in, we had animals that represented our values, and as an example, we had the bee. Signified really, really great communication, because obviously the bee does the wiggle dance and lets the rest of the hive know where the food is. And so we had these analogies of animals, and actually every single Friday we would have a shout out from the founders about who had lived the values that week. And every person that won would get a cuddly toy. The cuddly toy costs a little tiny bit, but not much. But because there was something quite visual, if you've got quite a lot of people that are in a shared working space or an office space or anything that you can do to represent it, right? Like a team's background or something to hold that value for the week to show, look, I've got the whatever that is, can just be quite fun. But that constant shout out of what good looks like can be relatively cost effective and inexpensive, but very impactful to get the habit of behaviors.
Yeah, those are great. All great suggestions. Just a quick one I would add is an exercise we did at the ScaleUp I was at for about 6 years, but 3, maybe 4 times we had a company kind of all hands together, and we drew out from first step to current stage a mural of the company. All the things that had, transpired, et cetera. That kind of served a couple of different purposes. For one, kind of put everyone, especially people who joined later, on a kind of common footing for what the story was. Number 2 is it provided an opportunity, for instance, to talk about where things had gone wrong, et cetera. And number 3, as related to that, was also an opportunity to talk about values in action. Not, it's great to have values. It's even better to have them as well-defined values, spelled out, et cetera. But I think also to be able to point to very specific, actions, events, like this is something, things went horribly wrong at X time, and here's how we responded, et cetera. It can also just be, as was said, sort of just a fun way to do that also.
As a co-founder of a green building startup in Swansea, we're planning to raise Series A in the next year, where we design eco-friendly construction materials. I'm interested in tracking metrics that can highlight skill gaps and inform our training programs. Given our budget constraints, what are the most cost-effective HR metrics that could help us understand our team's developmental needs and measure the success of internal training? Also, how can we set realistic benchmarks to gauge improvement over time, ensuring our workforce remains aligned with our innovation goals? That's quite a question. And let's drop Joe at the deep end. Joe, would you like to go first? Then we'll go to Carl, and last but not least, Louise.
Yeah, you did drop me in the deep end with this one. Cost-effective HR metrics that help you understand teams' developments. I mean, there's your very obvious ones around, number of external training qualifications or CPD undertaken within a period like 12 months, time since somebody last trained or since they were hired. You can start to define, either the frequency and cadence of development or time since last undertaken. I would say probably with anyone that's in role and has been in role for some time, use the things that you have already available, like the job descriptions, and they can simply look at each of the skills or competencies or knowledge areas within that job description and rate themselves A, B, C. They're either above level, at level, or below level. And that will give you a quantitative measure, a percentage of those people that are A, B, or C, right? And you can then start to pick off the most critical gaps. And I think obviously you're going to relate back to any kind of performance management cycles that you have. Think about the way that they're set up to start looking at training gaps. And even that could be qualitative conversation around when was the last time you developed self? How did you do that? How much time in the last quarter have you put aside for your own development needs? I think you can get creative, but you've got to make sure your mechanisms for performance management work for you and they've got the right questions.
Thanks, Joe. I would say starting with a capability baseline, a bit of a skills matrix, but a basic one at this stage. So just map in the top 4 or 5 critical skills per role. But the thing that I would say about a skills matrix, and I know this might be a little bit controversial, they do not work unless they can be challenged really, really hard. I would say critique that yourself. Have the employee and the manager complete a skills matrix for the employee. Where are they against the critical skills in that role? And then have a bit of a calibration meeting or call it a critique meeting. But I think that critiquing really needs to happen by somebody objective, by the founder, asking things like, how do you know that to be true? What are the examples? What does this not tell us? What are we assuming about this? Do not accept it as it is probably the number one rule when it comes to that baseline or a capability matrix. Don't take the data as it is or the scoring or the rating for each scale as it is. They do really only work if they can be challenged. In terms of metrics and HR metrics, I've found that actually the metrics don't necessarily come from HR or HR system. The data is probably sitting in a lot of the tools that your team use operationally, even at times where you might not assume them to be. So thinking about project tools if that's what you use. I've so many questions about the industry and the team. But if you're using any sort of a project tool, looking at the time that's being spent at each stage of that design. You've said design. I don't know if there's a development piece after that, but how long is being spent at each time? Where are the blocker points? Where does productivity seem to tank and why? Those are the indicators of where time probably needs to be spent when it comes to training. So you're probably going to get a lot of your metrics from systems, software, processes outside of just HR. And then I would consider as well, are there any like industry benchmarks that you could look at as well? So you can see, if you're at that stage of, I don't know what I don't know about that number, is that good, bad, or indifferent? Having a look to see if there's any other benchmarks externally that you could use that would indicate, yeah, that's something that is indicating a training need. And also looking at in your team. So, why is John taking twice as long as Jane? And actually taking a look at even just a couple of employees side by side to be able to see what you really can expect of your team and where that's not being met. That should then lean into any sort of training programs that you develop afterwards.
Yeah, those are great. I don't really have a lot to add to that other than I would just continue doing what you're doing, which is asking others for advice on it. I don't think you need to be limited to your subsector to do that. And I think whether, again, it's peers or other founders, especially within the green community, I think people are usually quite open to collaborating and sharing practice. Similarly, I would be asking the VCs that as well. It provides the opportunity to get that feedback, but also to engage with them. So those are some thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, team. We are now at the top of the hour. This has been Startup Talent Q&A 177, and you have been absolutely amazing. So I'm going to try not let you go without some parting words. Perhaps we can start with the ladies of the house, Lou, Joe, and last but not least, Carl. The floor's yours.
Oh, I feel like Carl captured that absolutely beautifully in the last your last response, Carl. Yeah, look, we're all sitting on this panel here, and I started my journey about a year ago after lots of time in-house, and I've tried to keep it as real as possible, particularly on places like LinkedIn, because I think the comparisons that can be drawn, much like we hear with other social media platforms, can be really disruptive, negative, distracting when you're doing absolutely amazing things and great work. And I would say, don't lose sight of the fact that everybody, regardless of how long they're in a role, in a job, in a career, whether they have the corner office or not, we are all figuring it out as we go along. We are all asking similar questions in different areas of our own business, attending the different Q&A sessions that Anton runs every week. And where you have these questions and you feel stuck or frustrated, or you're having one of those days that we all have where we spiral and think, what on earth have I done? They will come, and know that everybody else has them too. But I think coming to places like this, as Carl put it, just keep asking questions, keep reaching out for support, and finding places that will quieten that noise.
Thank you very much, Lou, and have a great Christmas and New Year's. And thank you for your support so far. Joe.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I've got to drop for another call, but I would say not all of your kind of people interventions will necessarily have a direct link to pushing the letter commercially or into a different kind of market vertical. But they are important. Like, don't forget the human factors. People sometimes need to have a little bit of breathing space before they dive back into the hard work. And so have fun, create spaces to breathe. And they're really important because it will keep the tenacity going and it'll make sure that people are still resilient and they're able to give that discretionary effort that you're going to need.
Thank you, Joe, and a very good Christmas and New Year's to you too. And thank you for joining us today. Carl.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent point. Just, keep the human in human resources, basically. Yeah, again, just time spent just connecting with people in what is for everyone a super challenging time between market conditions and trying to be human in an age of AI. Just none of that stuff can be overstated. So time spent just being there for people is really well spent. That's it.
Thank you very much, Carl, and you too as well. Thank you for your support so far. Have a great Christmas and New Year's. And huge thanks to everybody, those of you that tuned in via the live streams, but especially those of you that made it here onto Microsoft Teams. This was our last Startup Talent Q&A for this year. We will now resume with our next Talent Q&A on the 12th of January, 2026. Before my parting words, Just a couple of quick reminders. In general, we run 6 regular rooms. Monday's talent, as you saw today. Tuesday's product and tech. Wednesday's growth. Thursday's fundraising. Second Friday of each month, it's UK Startup Law, which was last Friday. And third Friday of each month, it's UK Startup Finances, which will be this Friday. They're all from 12 to 1 p.m. UK time. They're all available on our site for you to register via startuptoscaleup.club. Again, the site is startuptoscaleup.club. And you can RSVP to any preferred session by clicking join and then registering quickly on Luma. I've also shared a link to our WhatsApp group for startup talent in the chat here, but you can also join our WhatsApp community via our site, startuptoscaleup.club. At the top and bottom of that site, you'll see a WhatsApp icon you can click on. As far as my parting words are concerned, just remember the startup journey can be both exciting but also quite challenging. So try to have some fun in the meantime and be kind to yourself and everyone else for that matter too. If you're not joining us again this week, have a great Christmas and New Year's if you celebrate them. If not, have a great end of the year and a brilliant start to 2026. And if you can, try to use this time to connect and recharge. It's brilliant. And it's very useful to make sure you get your people journey sorted and get it done right when it comes to your startup. But it's just as important, if not more important, for you to be able to connect with the people that you love and that are close to your heart during this time. So try to do that as much as you possibly can. Hopefully, we'll see you all for tomorrow's call on product and tech, helping founders build your early stage. But for now, thank you and God bless.